Welcome to the MMHP in the 989. Channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history from the city by the bay. And now, here's your host, Scott Baker.
And we're back here for part two with Mr. Tom T-Ball here at the MMHP in the 989. We'd like to thank him for coming in and spending time with us and giving us the background of his not only his history from Cadillac to Mount Pleasant, but his WCMU radio show Homespun all the way through now, including here through the present day with his band Crazy Chestur. And we'll get to hear where he last left off on the last episode, all the way through the brand new album that they have out now and where he plans to go with WCMU Radio and Crazy Chestur as well. And the history of roots music is doing fine and well here in Mid-Michigan. We'd like to let you go along for the ride here with Mr. Tom T-Ball for part two in the MMHP and the 989. Enjoy.
I guess, I also want to talk about, if it's okay, if you have questions, go ahead and ask. But I also think about, for me, in an adult world and getting hooked up with all this traditional music and starting to play the bass, it led me to other people who were playing that kind of music. There were people that were living around Cadillac and Traverse City at that time that were playing bluegrass and some of that music, and I got to meet those people probably in the later 70s and the early 80s. And they needed, their bass player was leaving, and they were playing music, and they wanted somebody to come to play the bass. Would you like to play the bass with me? Sure. So I got hooked up with these guys called the Bluegrass Reunion, and that took me on a whole other journey for 3 or 4 years when they were in that area, and we gigged a lot in Traverse City because that was where someone were kind of living around Glen Arbor and the Traverse City area and that sort of thing, and there was a bar in downtown Traverse City called the Sawmill, and it wasn't a big place, but it was kind of this happening place, and they had a stage at one end of it, and I mean, we'd play there a dozen times a year, probably at least, so.
Is that when Wheatland came on your scene too?
It was all in that time period, Scott. Yeah, I was, again, that.
Did you play Wheatland with that band by chance?
No, we didn't actually.
I think at the first one there were 4 or 5 bands.
There was, yeah. And in fact, one of the bands, Fred, was the Pine River Valley Boys, and they played there.
Bill Richmond.
And the banjo player in that band, whose name is Paul Kirshner, he eventually left the Pine River Valley Boys. He was a school teacher, and they were traveling around and playing a lot. But he was one of the guys I eventually met in this Bluegrass Reunion band, and I played with him for 3 or 4 years probably. It was all regional. I mean, we weren't jumping in a van and traveling across 3 states and not changing our clothes for a week. But
was it college period? Did you go to college?
I didn't. No, okay. I came out of high school, started working.
You had a day job during all this?
Yeah.
Family?
No. Well, at that time, no, I was single.
So you were able to do a day job and rock and enjoy your night music?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
This was still in Cadillac?
That was, right.
Your bass was still Cadillac? Yeah.
Yes, at that time, yeah.
Okay.
I moved from Cadillac in 1980. And what precipitated all that was I was getting more and more involved with the Wheatland Music Organization, and all those people lived around Mount Pleasant and Remus. Yeah. And I thought, well, this must be the leap. And I think at that time I was working for my brother. He had with another guy, had a pole barn, post-construction business. I mean, I was banging nails and hauling wood, and it wasn't my favorite thing to do, but I made pretty good money at it, so, but the great thing was I thought I need to get out of here, and I need to go start someplace else, and Mount Pleasant was the area. And so the great thing, my brother, God bless him, said, okay, I'll lay you off. So I'm not, you don't need to quit. I'll lay you off, and you can draw unemployment for some amount of time and get yourself established down there.
Wow.
Yeah. Beautiful guy.
Yeah.
We had our differences, but that was one of the great things he did for me in my life.
Damn.
But so he laid me off, and so I moved to Mount Pleasant and started hanging out with a bunch of those people. I met some folks and lived in their house, on the second floor of their house for a little while, for probably 6 or 8 months. Got myself feet on the ground, that sort of thing. But and it was just the whole thing started to ramp up from there. You're hanging out with people that they're playing that kind of folk music, and you're meeting new people all the time, and even by 1980, the festival had been going on for 6 or 7 years about that time, and I had been involved with it. So you start to meet all these other people that were coming in, folks like the Red Clay Ramblers and the Hot Mud Family, and Beau Soleil from Louisiana, and the Dannon, who was this powerhouse Irish band. And the cool thing about all that is, for me, and it wasn't me directly, but the Wheatland Music Festival was probably the first place lots of people ever heard Irish music played live, traditional Irish music, or heard traditional Cajun music played live. That was the great thing about the organization, is the people who were running it had this vision of, okay, well, there's singer-songwriters and there's old-time music and there's bluegrass music, and we're going to do that too. But there's an opportunity for us to, here's this band that comes from Ireland, and they're traveling around, and they need gigs, and we can be one of their gigs, and so you just start to meet some of those people, and you start to have relationships with those people, and you go deeper and deeper into that music too. That I just remember just being bowled over by the Dannon. They were just, when you watched them play, it was like watching a freight train go down a track, and it wasn't, they didn't have stomp boxes and flashing lights and dancing girls. This was
musicians.
This was real people playing real music.
Yeah, big difference.
And it was exciting, because it made me quickly realize, in that genre of music, you can either play or you can't. There's nothing to cover up your inaccuracies or folk music is just kind of like that,
So you would say that around between the late 70s and early 80s, that Remus, Mount Pleasant area would probably be the hub of roots music in Michigan at that time. Yeah, I would. It was like our Nashville of roots music.
I would, only because all those people I mentioned, for example, like the Hot Mud Family, they were kind of based in Dayton, and so they're based in the Midwest, and so they traveled around the Midwest a lot, and they loved us because they thought what we were doing was pretty cool. We were hiring their friends, and we were hiring them, and we were putting on this event that everybody just loved, and so you'd see them. Not necessarily just in September, but you might hire them for something in the wintertime when they needed a gig, or those kinds of. There was a little bit of a hub action going on there. The music organization quickly became a place where, well, let's call these people up. Maybe we can get some work, for a night or something. We're trying to string a dozen gigs together from East Ohio to Western Illinois, and Michigan kind of figures into a little bit of that. Southern Michigan, and in this case, Central Michigan at that time. So,
did that translate to the university? Was there some interest among the college kids into this?
A little bit. Part of one of the reasons that was during that time period, we would have the fall festival, and for I think 2 or 3 years, we did a spring event at the university at Finch Field House, which is still there on the campus of Central Michigan University. We knew people. We rented the place for I think it was just they were 1-day events, but it was an all-day thing, and you'd hire 6 or 7 bands, and there'd be music going on outside, but there'd be music inside the field house, and people would come and pay money, and it wasn't certainly as big as the festival was getting, but it was another opportunity for bands coming through. Oh, we can play this gig in the spring. This will be our hub gig, and we're going to get 3 or 4 other gigs, and so we'll go out for a few days and we'll make some music.
Well, you were bringing in all those bands from all around. Was there any Michigan bands during that time period that started to open up your eyes? Like, this is really good. This is, wherever they may be coming from, maybe you could give us a little insight on what Michigan had to offer for that time period.
I think, as we mentioned earlier, I think the Pine River Valley Boys, I think, were very influential. They lived in the Central Michigan area, and they played out a lot. They would play bars in the area and that sort of thing. So they were really pushing the bluegrass thing.
There was a lot of bluegrass festivals in Michigan.
There was
at that time.
There was,
because we played at all of them.
Yeah, in fact, I do want to mention as a sidebar to all this music too, because it just seemed like there's one spoke after another the longer we talk here. But the Charlotte Bluegrass Festival in Charlotte, Michigan, was one of the early places that I saw lots of people that influenced me a lot, and they weren't necessarily from Michigan. Some were. There were bluegrass bands like Kathy Ann and the Sounds of the South, and there was, Roy McGinnis from, and interestingly enough, places like Wyandotte, Michigan, and those kinds of places were really big hubs for that kind of music, partly because of all the factory workers came from Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee. They came up to work in the car factories, and they brought some of that music with them. And so there were places around that area of Detroit and outer Detroit that you could go see the Osborne Brothers on a Saturday night in a club, and if you want, I never did. I'm kind of kick myself sometimes for not doing that, although it was still kind of new for me, and I could only go travel so far, I think, more than anything else. It wasn't.
Fortune Records was basically formed to record those southern bands, country bands, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff that came out on Fortune.
Yeah, and I don't know much about that label. There was a label called Old Homestead Records, which was kind of in that same sort of thing, and that's the label that I kind of remember. And then, of course, eventually Rounder Records, God bless them.
Mm-hmm. Those Old Homestead Records are now are collectible records.
Yeah, well, they were some were reissues, but some were current records that were being recorded at the time. But I think, some of those people, Scott, are the ones I kind of remember. Some, I don't have most of the people I really remember were either regional or national acts. I mean, Charlotte was probably the first place that I saw Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys. Probably saw Ralph Stanley and the Clinch Mountain Boys for the first time there. Saw the Country Gentlemen there 2 or 3 times. Saw Larry Sparks there and the Lonesome Ramblers for the first time. I mean, all these people were touring musicians, making records, and touring nationally at that time. And that's just a pinprick. I know I'm missing many, many others, but
it's just fantastic to put together the timepieces. As we do these podcasts, it's like I try to pinpoint areas of memory from our own gift to the world from our state, as well as the big tours that came through. And you're opening the eyes to maybe our listeners to a lot of people that may not have even heard nationally already, let alone who may have been around here in our state. You know?
Right, yeah. And
I know Fred knows quite a few of them.
He does, right. And I think,
Wayne Maynard out of Flint.
Wade is
legend.
Wade and Julia. I mean, again, you're right. There's another person who I didn't see till much later.
Me either.
Partly because I don't think he was out performing a lot. I mean, in his youth, he was running around the United States playing music.
Yeah, I think he lived to be almost 100.
He did. I believe so, yeah. So he would. That's another really good example. I forgot about Wade. So again, that's kind of, my vision of what I remember of it. Again, keep in mind, I'm at that point, I'm 26, 28, 30. I mean, I got the world by the tail. I don't have a wife. I don't have family. I'm learning how to play music and hanging out and
footloose and fancy free.
Exactly. And good or bad, I don't know. I can't change any of it now, but I guess it kind of comes back to the point I really wanted to make was this arc from 1973 or 4 to today is an arc I never would have had if I wouldn't have met Rick Duell and Barry Anderson and Fred Johnson and Roy Nickerson in 1973 and started hanging out with those guys and started playing music. And Fred Johnson comes and says, "Here, I want you to play this washed-up bass." And I go get a string bass after that. And you start to meet more people. You start to play more music with more people. And it's been an arc that I'm astounded at when I sit and think about it today.
How did you meet Andy Cohen? Did he play in Mount Pleasant?
He did, partly because, as you may know, Fred, Andy's first wife's parents lived in Mount Pleasant, Michigan.
Okay, I didn't know that.
His father-in-law, I think, was a professor at Central Michigan University. I don't know what he taught. I can't remember. But they were in town there. And Iris, his first wife.
Right.
So I probably met him through that a little bit, or probably met him more importantly through the public radio station, because in the 80s, WCMU public radio started doing live shows at the university called Our Front Porch.
Oh, yeah.
And our director of radio, John Scheffler, and a fellow named Dan Bracken, who worked for WCMU doing engineering and that sort of thing. They were the real drivers with university events at Central Michigan University to putting on these shows called Our Front Porch. And I think, Fred, that might be where I really met Andy more than just, "Hi, how you doing?" And then he was off doing something else.
Did we do that show twice? For some reason, I think all these years, I think we did it twice.
We could have. Some of that, I don't want to fall back on being footloose and fancy free, but with that comes lots of other things. Yeah. and I try to, especially in my older age right now, I try to sit around and think about all that stuff and what did I see and what time period was that and how did that work, and some of it it's very front of mind and others not so much. And
it's lost in the purple haze.
It is. It is that. And so I probably met Andy more or less around those Our Front Porch shows.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And so, and again, there's another guy, Andy Cohen, who was really, still is today, but he was really into Big Bill Brunzi, Reverend Gary Davis, all those finger style guys, Mississippi John Hurt. The list could go on and on. But he was a real, is it progenitor? Is that the word I want of the music? And he, whenever you would see him play, he would cite these people as where he collected this music from. He was really good at that.
Great storyteller.
Yeah, and a really great storyteller.
Well, your bandmate Andrew Rogers did some stuff with him in Ann Arbor, as well as recently recorded some material here in Bay City at Andy Reid's studio. That's in the can right now. Yeah, and they took some retakes of old photos, but nowadays like looking the same, doing the same thing. Yeah, and he sent us some of that from his podcast show, and I thought that was pretty unique. Yeah, and Andrew Cohen's got a great back history, from what I've learned over the podcast. I mean, I've heard of his name over the years, but now I've gotten to dive in a little bit.
I did a gig with him once at the Arc in Ann Arbor with Howard Armstrong,
who was part of if your
Martin
listeners
Bogan.
don't know, was part of Martin Bogan and Armstrong, which was a black string band in the 30s.
Yeah,
mandolin, guitar, and violin. Howard Armstrong played the fiddle. Really, and the Wheatland Festival had Martin Bogan and Armstrong twice, maybe 3 times in their career. I mean, it was again, I step back and look at that now and go, holy cow! I mean, these guys were playing segregated gigs in the South and Tennessee in the 30s and the 40s. And here they're playing for a white audience in Remus, Michigan, in front of 3,000 or 4,000 people, and they're loving it. The band and the people. They're
united.
Yeah, they're just seeing. It was. I don't want to say it was a rediscovery because they never really went away, but they had a resurgence at that time, I think.
yeah.
And we were just so lucky to be in that path of a place where they thought, oh, well, some of our friends have talked about this. This might be a good place to go play and get some new fans, even in their their 60s and 70s, and I think about hard living. I mean, I lived a pretty charmed life compared to some of those guys. It was tough. I'm sure it was tough for them, but they persevered and they kept playing music right up to the day they died. So,
well, you were bringing in the story of the radio show at CMU. And your show began soon.
Yeah, well, right. It was right around, yes, I think it was, I would say 83, 84 was when I started doing that. And it all circled back around to John Scheffler wanting traditional music on public radio, like a local show. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there was that time when a Prairie Home Companion was just
How did you get in with those guys with the radio?
Well, because I was part of the Wheatland Music Organization.
Because of Wheatland. Okay.
And so there's this connection relationship that just keeps going on and on. Yeah. And John invited some of those folks, including me, to the station, have a little meeting and says, this is what I want to do. I want to, create a local music program. You don't have to run any of the equipment. There'll be a board operator there. You just, you get to bring in some of your music if you've got some of that, or we have some in our library. I mean, the library is extensive today. It's huge. But the fact is that he said, I want to do this on a Saturday night from 9 until 11. We need something to fill there. Because I think I'm guessing around that time, I think maybe a Prairie Home Companion was kind of on at that time period. And he wanted to kind of continue that traditional music block, if you will. And so it was going to be live. So there was probably half a dozen of us initially that said, yeah, that sounds like fun. We could do this. And then I think over a relatively short period of time, maybe 6 months, because it was live, was on the air on Saturday night. I mean, we're all young people. I think there was that moment for some of those people that said, I have better things to do on Saturday night than do this, And so the large numbers started getting whittled down to eventually probably 3 or 4 people. And you would just set up a schedule and you'd rotate in. So I wasn't on every week, but I might have been on once or twice a month, So, and then consequently at that time, John and Dan and some other people were starting to think about producing live music at the university. So, and through his connections with Wheatland, I think they were forthcoming and sharing information about who we might want to contact. It started out in most of the shows for the longest time were in Moore Hall, Kiva, which probably, when you set up chairs in there, probably had 400 people, 350 maybe. It was a big circle in Moore Hall, and they brought in microphones and equipment and tape machines off in the other room and ran wires and recorded it all. And he started to bring in some pretty important people over time. Folks like Nancy Griffith came when she was really just kind of starting out.
Mike, didn't you say John Hartford played at it?
John Hartford played at he played at the Wheatland Festival. I don't think he ever played on our front porch. So
he did. Yeah.
Oh, maybe
I have a recording of it.
Okay, maybe he did. Again, there were. It was for a while. It seemed like there were a couple times a month. It wasn't every week, but John was booking shows, and they were live shows. And so what happened was, interestingly enough, there was that time block. The shows usually started at 8:00 in the evening, and the show would take place, and let's just say it was preempting Homespun, okay, at that time. And what happened was, let's just say the show ran from 8 until, I don't know, let's just say it ran from 8 until 10. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there was there's an encore. It would finish it, 5 or 10 after the show's ending. Well, the station, at one time, those shows were being broadcast live. They weren't being taped. They were being taped, but they were going over the air live.
Yeah.
So the station needed some filler to get you up to the 11 o'clock hour where the next program started.
Right.
So if I was there to the show, I would leave the show, and Moore Hall was just a hop, skip, and a jump from the station. And so I'd go back over to the station. You'd hear the end of the broadcast happening, the applause. You'd fade down, and I would play traditional music until 11 o'clock.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
Yeah, so I would fill that last hour, 45 minutes, whatever it was, And again, I look back at that time period now, and I thought probably was thinking, I wasn't thinking this at the time, but thinking I must have not had a very exciting life at that time to even though I look back on it now, it was pretty exciting.
It's the Tom Ball after party.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, but I didn't think about it at that time. But I was playing music, but I was still, on nights that I was supposed to be there, went and did the show live most of the time from 8 p.m. to 11. It was a 3-hour show. And that was really cool because you could really stretch out and play Tex-Mex music and Tejano music. And because it was we were getting those records at the station, and, those things were starting to show up on Folkways and our Hooley records and all those kind of things, and because people were putting those records on, and blues, acoustic blues records and bluegrass and old time music was really bumping at that time, thanks to the Highwood String Band, who, again, the music festival had them 3 or 4 times in their tenure. They really repopularized old time fiddle music and really traditional folk music from old singers from guys like Roscoe Holcomb from Kentucky and Fields Ward and all these legendary, I'll call them local, Tom Ashley, all these people who lived locally but were known nationally, partly because of the records that were coming out, and then you'd see the Highwoods and they'd say, we got this song from so and so, and they'd be playing it, and you'd think again, wow, that's pretty cool. I'd like to go find out more about those people, and they just had this sound of it was that two fiddles, clawhammer, banjo, guitar, and bass and vocal. And I mean, again, on a great day, it was like watching a freight train go down the track. And the music was so in the groove. And they really repopularized fiddle music primarily. There were a lot of people who, I'm thinking about all those kids who played classical violin in school, elementary or junior high, and thought, wow, I play the violin. This is really cool music. I should learn how to play this. Yeah. And it really, in the 70s and then even on into the 80s, they really, really expanded old time music like you can't believe, because it was dying off. It really was. In that 60s time period, you had those people, but they were more regional than anything else. They weren't outside of folks like Doc Watson and maybe Clarence Ashley and thanks to guys like Ralph Rinsler, who was a musician, but he managed Bill Monroe for a while, and he also could see that I could bring Doc Watson up to New York City and he could play a week at Gertie's Folk City, and people would come and see him. And again, that music
residencies.
There would be, and they would, again, people who didn't even know about Doc Watson would go and see him, and again, it's that revelation of, holy cow, who is this guy? He's blind, but yet, he sang like a bird and could play the guitar like people who could see couldn't play the guitar, So there's just this whole revolution of the music, which is, in some small way, I feel pretty proud to be part of, just because I was just doing my thing, and it wasn't so much even playing, but it just promoting the music, talking about the music, and then you start to meet other people, the New Lost City Ramblers and the Mike Seegers and the John Cohens and the Tracy Schwartzes and the Tom Paleys. All these guys were really ambassadors for the music, and they were making records, and again, they were citing where they got this music from. And that was the real cool thing about folk music to me, is you didn't have to wonder, well, where'd that song come from? And then you'd have to do some deep dive and maybe never find out. They would tell you. Folkways Records would put, these 10-page booklets in the LPs, and there would be song lyrics and there'd be some dissertation, about where this music came from, and it's the folk process in its classic form. Mm-hmm. So it's just, I'm still amazed.
Take us into your 90s or not.
Well, at that point, then again, let's think about this now for a minute. Doing stuff with the We the Music organization, I was another way that I was really keeping my finger on the pulse was. There were a couple of record stores in Mount Pleasant, because it's a university town, and got hired to work there. One was a shoot off of Boogie Records, which was a kind of an old hippie record store in Mount Pleasant. The guy sold that to another guy, and I went to work for him. It was called Full Moon Records. He was out of Traverse City and Rochester. They had 5 or 6 locations. But I worked for him for about 3 or so years, and in that time period I worked with Mike Johnston because Mike Johnston worked for Full Moon Records, and really got an education on jazz and world music from Mike.
A whole other direction.
Mike took me into a whole other orbit of Cecil Taylor and John Coltrane and Wynton Kelly and Miles Davis. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on because he was really deep into that. And the great thing about Mike is he's a teacher in more ways than one, because he'd find out something that you liked and he'd say, well, okay, yeah, so you like John Coltrane, you might check out this guy Hank Mobley. I think you might like Hank Mobley too. And so, you'd listen to him and go, again, where have I been? How did I miss this? The guy's making records in the 50s. I wasn't, was barely born then, but that's another story. Right. So anyway, I worked there, again, still with this big connection of Wheatland and WCMU, and working in what I would call somewhat the heyday of the music business, because even at that time Full Moon Records were buying direct from the major labels, and there were a bunch of other independent distributors that we were getting records from, and
Billy Thomas.
Yeah, Billy. Yeah, Billy's a good example. But you would start to know these people and create relationships with them, and then if you were looking for something in particular, they could help you get that and bring it into the store, and you could sell it to people. And that happened even during that time period for Full Moon Records. And then down the street was another record store called Michigan Warehouse Records, and they were out of Lansing. They were pretty big started in the Lansing area, and they were in College Town, and they were selling lots of college music. And again, at that time, it wasn't just for me. Yeah, there was all this sidebar jazz music, but I was being pummeled with pop music too. I mean, from I don't know, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers to the list goes on and on. I mean, it doesn't stop. So you're still U2 and John Mellencamp, and you're selling all these records too, and you're hearing them too, and thinking this is good music too. I didn't ever shun any of that, and again, I can still appreciate Black Sabbath and Alice Cooper. I can. I just don't. That's just not in front of me anymore.
Right.
But I can appreciate it. So Michigan Warehouse Records came to me and said, we want you to come and work for us. And it was a little step up. They had more stores. They had bigger buying power. And I could still stay in Mount Pleasant and work. Yeah. And it was full-time work. It was 40 hours a week. But I was getting to listen to music and talk to people about music all day. I mean, what a dream job. Yeah, exactly. Right. And at that time, because of the time period, and being in a college town, you got a chance to hear lots of other things that maybe you wouldn't otherwise musically, and then turn more people on to that too. So I went to work for Warehouse Records and worked for them for 12 years. And started there just as an employee, and then eventually ran the store. I had a staff of, 7 or 8 people, probably college kids most of the time. A couple of them I still keep in contact with because they were music junkies like I was, and they had great ears, and they were good people.
Did you ever have a moment where you went, you want to hear Griot Galaxy, go see Mike at New Moon?
Yes. Definitely. Yeah. No. Or
he'd say the same thing. He wants to hear some.
Yeah. He could have. I mean, I'm certain of that. Again, because we've been friends for so long. It wasn't. I suppose there was competition, but as it went along, there were probably a little bit of. He had his regular customers. We had our regular customers.
Yeah.
And
It's ironic that you both were running record stores during that time period, and you both have your own radio show.
Yeah,
and
I mean, it just
I didn't see that coming tonight.
Happenstance, yeah. So, but it was during the college years of vinyl and CDs though too, and even with Michigan Warehouse Records, again there was that point of if you wanted something, you wanted a copy of something to listen to or to play in the store because you thought you could sell it, I could call up somebody and it would just come to my door in 4 or 5 days. And some people in that business were really good at that. Others weren't so much, and you had to start to kind of lean on them. But
I had the same thing happen to me in the '90s. I became a journalist at Delta College, and I was hired to Bay State Times and Second News before I graduated. Right. But I made connections with every record company that I liked music from, and my CDs by the week were just coming in, and they're like, "Is those school property?" I'm like, "Nope, this is my work," and I'm scoring every CD by every band that I like just with phone calls. Send me a promo, I'll do a little write up. Send me a promo. It was great. Yeah, so it was what I call the glory years of the music business, because there was you could just do that, and if somebody was coming to Detroit and I wanted to go see him live, I could, because we had relationships with all the major labels, because they all had offices in Detroit. You could call somebody up. You could call up your sales rep and go, yeah, Paul Simon Graceland's coming to Pine Knob. Can you give me tickets? Yeah, sure. Yeah, they'll be at the box office for you. Poof. Yep. I mean, I saw tons of great music like that. Me too.
And it was just, again, I didn't get rich at it, but I became rich in way other ways than monetary, I guess. Sure.
That's why you're here. This musical knowledge, man. I guess this musical background.
Yeah. It's
and you're still doing it.
I am, and I think about especially because I do work my day job for WCMU, and then I also produce this radio show for them. One or both of those is going to come to an end in the next couple of years or less. Work, certainly, because I'm just, I don't want to say I'm tired of work, and I have a good job, and I have a good boss, and I believe in what I'm doing, but I want to be able to stop and smell the roses too. And I don't know, even at that time, I haven't decided yet, and there's been no discussion. Do I just walk away from it all? Shows ends, see you later. I don't know.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, there is. So,
well, lead us into one more segment here, Crazy Chestur. What were you doing leading up to that, and how did that begin? Well,
let's also then, we'll talk a little bit about that, but I also want to talk about after the bluegrass thing, and you start to meet more people, and some of those people were in that scene in the 70s at the Charlotte Bluegrass Festival when you were really first starting out. I also started meeting a couple of other people, and in Mark Schrock and Frank Youngman, and I met those folks in the 70s. They were all playing music. And in the 90s, then, through the Wheatland Music Organization, we started a band called Jive At Five with a couple of other guys. And we were playing, and again, this all kind of comes out of the folk music scene eventually, but we were all kind of into, I was into jazz music, but I was also into swing and western swing and the blues and all that stuff, and we were all at this spring event for the Wheatland Music Organization, this traditional arts music weekend, and there were a couple of people that we knew that were teaching dance there that wanted some of this kind of music as for dance, and we thought, well, we can play some of this stuff, we can back them up. So we did, and that just sort of leapt into getting together and playing this music all the time as Jive at Five. And at one point, it was a 6 or 7 piece band. I mean, we had 3 horn players and piano, bass, drums, guitar, and singers. And again, it wasn't full time work. We all had day jobs, but we made a lot of music in that arena.
What era?
That was in the middle '90s up to today. Literally,
I remember seeing Jive for Five and so many ads. I lived in Midland at the time.
Yeah,
and it was like for Mount Pleasant. And do you guys
I have
had
the CD.
Yeah. We made 3 records as a band. And again, I would say over the year, in our heyday, we were probably playing, I don't know, we might have been playing 70 or 80 gigs a year. Not a lot, but enough for, regionally,
It's healthy.
Yeah, regionally. And there were a couple of times when we took a little time off, and we knew a whole bunch of people were into the dance scene in Minneapolis. There was a pretty big traditional music and dance scene in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And we traveled out there a couple times and played music for some of those people, and they got us gigs. You run out there for 3 or 4 or 5 days, and do dance stuff for concerts and that kind of a thing too. So there was that whole period, and again, it was very successful. I thought. Again, we made 3 records, and we were playing gigs, and we were having fun. And that kind of leveled off a little bit as time just went on. We had somebody that was doing booking for us, and then she stopped doing it, so the band was kind of doing it, and that sometimes that's not a good thing. You need somebody else making the phone calls all the time. And so it's leveled off. Although we're still playing music. I mean, we might play 6 gigs a year right now. But because we've been doing it for 30 years probably or longer, it's like riding a bike. And everybody in the band is pretty fearless. I mean, you look at somebody, a piece of music, and somebody says, "Well, can you play this?" I think so. Let's try it. It's not of, no, we can't. We're in our lane here. We can't ever do that stuff. So that's been ongoing for all this time, and then and I knew all the guys in Crazy Chestur just socially. I knew they were in the Mount Pleasant area. They all played in different bands, and I certainly knew Charlie and his first wife, and Jim Gilmore, actually, and Rob Glendenning. I think they were all in the first band that just knows I'm drawing a blank on their dang name, but
Bluegill?
The Bluegills, thank you. The Bluegills. And so I knew those people socially, and would go out and see them play every once in a while. And then they broke up, and wasn't really too much was going on. And then, again, this is probably now 7 or 8 years ago, if not 10. Charlie called me up one day. Charlie Walmsley called me up and said, I'm getting together with Jim and Rob, we're doing this kind of music, and I'm writing a few things, but we're kind of doing this covers of singer-songwriters, what I would call AAA music today, adult album alternative, which again encompasses a pretty broad brush, but it's the Van Morrisons, it's the band, it's the Bob Dylans, it's the Jackson Browns, all those people that are in that arena. And this is what we're doing. And Jim's not playing electric guitar, and we know you play the string bass, so you want to come and we'll get together at Jim's barn. You want to come over and play some music and see how it goes? And sure. I mean, half an hour from my house. I mean, why not? I have nothing to lose. And now a record and an EP later, we're still making some music.
Yeah.
And again, it's the whole thing of, I don't think anybody could play any more than we're playing. I'm outside, we could play a few more gigs a year, I think, probably. But I think it's the camaraderie and the relationship as much as anything else, and just getting together and playing some music. And every once in a while you take that out in front of people and they like what you're doing, and it inspires you to maybe go out and try to do some more of that too.
Crazy Chestur ended up being kind of an all-star band. I mean, when we talked to Andrew about it, or Charlie for their podcast, was you guys all come from a little bit different, but you all knew each other, and it's the camaraderie, like you say. It's kind of like it's like an all-star band and you guys do quite a broad swash of material, roots style. Yes,
definitely, and I think that's kind of the unique thing about it. I mean, it's. I'm playing through an amplifier, but it's a string bass. It's not an electric bass.
Right. And your guys are writing original material.
Yes, Charlie's. We're doing 6 or 8 or 10 of his songs in a set at any given time. So.
And the new one comes out when?
It is out right now.
Okay.
It's not out physically, but it's on.
You can download it.
But it's all on streaming services.
Okay.
Spotify.
It's the
Amazon.
new EP.
Yes, it's called 5x5.
Yep.
There's 5 songs that we've been doing live, but we hadn't recorded them before, and 3 of them are originals, 2 of them are covers.
Where did you record it?
We recorded it at Mackinac Harvest Studios in Grand Rapids with our friend Michael Crittenton. Michael's had that studio for a long time. In the Grand Rapids market. He has big ears, and he has good ideas, and he has good gear. So, and it was reasonable. You're not going to the record plant in New York, but it's what it is, and I'm pretty pleased with the end result. There's always that moment of, okay, all right, these songs are done. Yeah, okay, they're done, and then you listen to them and you think,
shit.
Gosh, I could play that a little bit differently, or
always. It's the hindsight.
It is, and when I think about both of those groups, and maybe not working anymore, maybe that gives me a little more time to spend on the phone, and you just try to work up a little more of a playing schedule, I guess.
So that's your future.
Kind of, I would say so, yeah. And I figure I can still do it. Do I like schlepping gear around? No.
Who does?
Yeah, and
that's what you get paid for. I always get told you get paid to haul that shit in. It's the gig that you play for free.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. Or most people say, "You're paying me to drive."
Yeah. Right. Same.
I'm playing for free. You're paying for me to drive to your location. So, so, but that's kind of the story in itself. I've been married for 22 years. That's a whole other story in itself, but which is great. It's been a really good thing. Someone to kind of keep you on the straight and narrow someday. So, and she likes the music. She doesn't live or die by it, but she likes it. And she lives with a lot of music. Being in the record business for 15 years, I have a fairly substantial record collection. Let's just say that
happens. Yeah.
It's just, and again, being in the heyday of that music,
man,
you could phone up anybody, or if you didn't, you could phone up somebody who knew somebody else that could probably get it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when I worked with Mike, at Full Moon Records, he really, I probably increased my jazz record collection by tenfold, and it just just to this day. I mean, and again, I look at those things as investment more, as much as anything else. I mean, I'm maybe the CDs, but I have a fairly good size record collection. So, and I know and Fred knows this too. There's a market for those things. I've sold a few of them just because I know that maybe this is the time to do that, and it, there is a certain point, I think, even when because Fred's saying in the beginning when we started, well, I'm still looking for records, and I'd say I'm still looking for records, but I probably I'm not looking as hard as I once did, because I think if I never bought another record and just spent the time listening to the ones I have, I could do that till I die.
Yeah.
and there's nothing morbid about it. It's just I have just a lot of stuff to listen to, and I think there is always that hunt of, oh wow, I saw that online today. I think that's affordable for me. Should I buy it or not? So I don't know.
Well, in wrapping it up here, bud.
Yeah.
Take us back to that arc. Are those 3 or 4 guys still around? 5 guys?
Yes, absolutely. The original members of Jive at Five, a couple of them have passed, but a couple, 3 of them are still around, which is great. And obviously, Crazy Chestur. Again, Andy Rogers joined the band a few years after we had been playing some music together. I think because him and Charlie were friends. Charlie just said, "You should come over and see if you can do something with your violin." We're playing. We get together at Jim Gilmore's barn. He's got a nice little space.
The guys in '73.
Oh, yes, they are, with the exception of Barry Anderson, who has passed. Yes, all the rest of them are still living.
You still talk?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would say because they live farther away from me than they used to, but absolutely. I mean, the internet's a great thing for that.
Yeah.
You can
it's the best part of Facebook.
talk electronically,
yeah.
Privately, or and a few times, you just pick up the phone. I'm a phone guy as much as anything else because it became really evident during the pandemic that I am social. I mean, I always knew that, but there was those times when I was, I worked from home for 16 months and there were just times when I just needed to pick up the phone and talk to somebody else.
That's great to hear that they're still doing their thing and you're still connected.
Yeah, yeah. So it's been an unbelievable journey for me, and I feel so lucky because it wouldn't have happened at all. I mean, I think about not meeting those people at that particular time. It may have. But I don't think it would have. And in 1972 and 3, again, I felt like I was probably subconsciously looking for something different. And this is what was presented to me and was bowled over by it. And it's not taking me around the world, but it's taken me halfway around the world. And there are people who I met in 1973 who are still living that I still stay in contact with.
Wow.
So that's the most important thing, I think, is the relationship aspect to. Mm-hmm. There's a social thing, but there's also a musical connection there too, which goes way past us even living, I think, sometimes.
For sure.
So
we want to thank you for all the music you've given us, all the stories, the promotions, the background. I mean, there's years of it, and that's why you're here, man. We thank you for coming on the show. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Had a good time. Appreciate it.
The MMHP is hosted on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and our own Libsyn podcast site. You can also search MMHP989 on Facebook for up-to-the-minute information, as well as both Dr. J and Sir Fred's album picks of the week, posted every weekend. You can connect with Scott on the web at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at MichiganRock'n'RollLegends.com, Sir Fred at FredRife.com, Brought to you by Michigan rock and roll legends located both inside the Bay County Historical Museum on Washington Avenue, as well as Scotty's Sandbar on Evergreen Drive at the Bay City Middle Grounds.
On behalf of the hosts, Gary, Dr. J. Johnson, Sir Fred Reif, archivist and videographer Mike Beatty, and myself, this podcast wouldn't be here without Studio 163's Alan Garcia, the voice of MMHP, Mr. Eddie Switek, all of our guests, and you, the listeners.
You've been listening to the MMHP and the 989.